So what we are hoping to do is provide you with a series of frameworks, which is one overarching framework at the end of the day, that when you do this really well, you will understand how to make your business repeatable. You will know what levers to pull, what they do at the most granular level.
I've got another awesome interview for you. This one's with Amos Schwartzfarb. Now, he's been growing businesses for over 25 years. He's been investing in startup businesses for the past 10 years, and he's helped to build companies that have sold to Yahoo, Home Depot, and there's over 60 other companies that he's helped to exit through his position as a managing director at Techstars, which is in Austin. He's also the best-selling author of Sell More Faster, also the co-author of the book Levers, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Long story short, he knows business and he's got some great frameworks to share from you. So enjoy the interview. Well, welcome to the call, Amos. Yeah, very much looking forward to this interview. And I thought maybe a great way to start. I'd like to know if you see yourself as a systems person.
No, I would not identify myself that way. I think I have been identified that way a lot, and
Yeah.
like when I reflect about how I approach things, which is I try to look at, or when I look at something that's super complicated, my first go-to is how do I make this really, really simple so that I can understand it? And I think if I'm being really honest and vulnerable, it stems from I don't think I like growing up, I never thought I was very smart. Like I wasn't a good student, so I had to figure out ways to like get shit done. Am I allowed to
Yeah.
curse on? And so I'd be like, okay, what's going on? How do I just make this really, really simple? And I think, sort of like that trauma of not thinking I was a smart kid or person was to create these like very, very digestible, understandable, consumable like boxes, which
Yes.
another way to say, yeah, I guess I create systems, but I don't think of no one's ever asked me that like that. I don't really think of myself that way, but probably.
Yeah, well, I think it's funny when I look at your book, because your book is like a system, and the way to approach and think about
Yeah.
business and what order might you get things organized. So, and sometimes like you can be a systems thinker, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you like writing out processes or checklists. I know a lot of business.
But I do like those things because it helps me be organized. Because
Yes.
I've got lots of all entrepreneurs, right? But like, there's so many things in my head,
Yeah.
and I like how do you keep track of it all? So like, I have, I'm sure I'm not by far from the only one. I have voice memos. I've got to-do lists, and I use email for certain things. I've got different notebooks for different things, and it's like, how do you organize your how do I organize all of the thoughts that are going on? That's
Yeah.
all levers was at the end of the day. When Trevor and I first there was a process that I put in place, and then Trevor and I decided to write the book, and we invited Troy and Cody to write the segments that they were really experts in. Trevor's is a systems person, and he would tell you that he is. Um,
Yes.
it was, he was working for me at Techstars at the time, and what he said to me was, "Yeah, it's like there's all this really hard stuff, and what you've done really well is you've just tried to break it into what are the five most important things, and how do you make them really simple to understand because they're so hard to do.
Yes.
So take one of the hard parts out, make it understandable." Yeah.
Yeah. The going from sort of understanding it and thinking of it in terms of a system, then to getting it documented, as in out of your head and to simplify. How do you go through that process? Is that something that takes a long time, or does it just jump straight into your head? How do you think about that?
Yeah. Let me see how I answer this. I would say if I were being intentional about it and reflecting backwards, it probably takes a really long time. I don't like when it came to writing levers, we weren't intentional about it ahead of time. We created this thing, we talked about it, and we said, huh, there's probably like a way to get this to a bigger audience. So this was our
Yeah.
thinking, writing levers, right? We were like, if this book exists in some other form, we're not going to do it. None of the four of us could find it. So we're like, okay, we all believe that these are the most important things that every business, regardless of who you are, need to do. You need to know your customers. You need to know your business model. You need to prioritize. You need to understand what your important metrics are, and you need to have a plan and a financial model. We think all businesses need to do that, regardless of who you are. And we couldn't find anywhere out there that helped someone. Not there were plenty of books that say you should do these things, but there
Yeah.
weren't any that said, here's how you do them in a really simple way. And so
Yes.
by the time we got to writing the book, we had done all the work, but we didn't set out to write the book. We didn't set out to create the process. We were just, I mean, really, we were just, and I won't say inventing, we were innovating for
Yeah.
our own necessity. That takes time. And then we looked back and said, oh shit, we have something here. So when it came down to sit down and actually writing the book, it took like a few weeks.
Yeah, yeah, that
Yeah.
that makes sense. I'm curious because the like a great system is a system that can work in a variety of different scenarios, as in it's like general enough that it works in a lot of system, like in a lot of different businesses, let's say for this example, but specific enough that someone can follow it. And there's this real fine line between having enough specifics that you can actually follow it and do it and get a result, but you don't want to go too specific. Otherwise, it kind of tailors it just to that, and the system doesn't work in all scenarios. So, um, how did you stress test that part? Because I mean, you apply it to your business, which is at a certain point, but then taking that
Yeah.
elsewhere. I'm curious to know how that.
Yeah, that's a super question, and no one's ever asked that before, in any way. But I would say, again, it wasn't necessarily intentional
Mm,
because there were four people, and we did all of those, even though we didn't know each other beforehand. All four of us, these were the things that we did. We didn't do them all the same, but we all did these things
yeah,
at multiple businesses, each as operators and as investors. So the
yeah,
stress testing happened because we were literally doing them over many, many years in hundreds and hundreds of companies. And by the time we got so again, like it wasn't planned, but by the
yeah,
time we got together, we're like, yeah, like I'll give you an example, the revenue formula. That was something that I picked up from Brian Barnum. He credits maybe he credits me or he credits someone else, but I credit him. Again, I remember it was him very distinctly at business.com. And when he joined business.com, we were probably at like 15, 20 million in revenue. We exited when we were at about 80 million in revenue. And he implemented the revenue formula there, right? So that's a
yeah,
pretty scaled business where we had raised a bunch of money by that point. And in juxtaposition to that, um, in my mind, I saw how it could be helpful for earlier stage companies. So I started doing that at Techstars in my very first year, which was
yeah,
now a decade ago. And I saw how it helped people conceptualize and think about the things they need to do. So we're like two, maybe not the opposite ends completely of the spectrum, but we're pretty far apart there. And I watched
yeah,
that type of thing happen over and over again. And as the companies that went through Techstars would grow up and continue to use it as a
yeah,
way to figure out the business, you could see that, okay, even over time, it is still working. So again, like it's not, I wish I could tell you that I was so smart that I was like, here's how you design it.
yeah,
I think we happened upon something that is meant to work in a way that does translate across many things. And we've even gone so far because um, Trevor Cody and I have another business where we just teach levers.
yeah.
And we had some nonprofits go through. Well, they don't care about, not they don't care about revenue, but they don't care about revenue. So we've even figured out how to adopt the exact thing. And rather than call it a revenue formula, we call it a value formula. So what's the value you're
Yep.
trying to bring to the nonprofit? It's not necessarily dollars. It's we want to help, more kids learn how to read, whatever it might be, right?
Yes.
Great. So how do you measure that you're actually successful at helping more kids learn how to read? Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It's and great to see as well, like the application into something like a not-for-profit. Like it's really about um, making an organization repeatable that you focus on with the leverage. And it doesn't levers, and it doesn't really matter as much about what the type of business is, and even the size. You mentioned from startups all through to businesses scaling. I'm curious. When you think about you're obviously going to start businesses differently now with everything that you've learned with levers, and there might be some subtle distinctions on how you might apply levers into an existing already operating business versus, hey, I'm about to start a new business, and you think about the framework right up front. I'm curious, yeah, what
Yeah.
tweaks or how you think about applying that.
Yeah, and I've tested a lot of things here. When you're going through when you're at a very young business, you can just sort of like shove this on. You could
Yeah,
it through this, right? And a lot of things won't connect yet, but it'll be really clear why they're not connecting. With an existing business, as you're alluding to, there is a tremendous amount more variables, including or maybe starting with the buy-in from the entire executive team. So you may have complete buy-in. You'll always have complete buy-in from the CEO, otherwise you wouldn't be there. But that doesn't mean the team is bought in. So like using
yeah,
W3 example, right, which is how do you figure out who your customer is, right? Like a great sales leader might like say, we know who our customer is. We're 100% sure. Cool, tell me why, and they can't.
yeah,
And then ask them to articulate who their customer is, and they do it in this very general way. And look, I grew up in sales, so nothing against salespeople, but that's how many sales leaders think. And so figuring out how to, and this is there's a little psychology. So this is one. There's lots of different things. Like this is a very specific example. There's a psychology that I often have to do with people when I'm helping them through this process, which is how to not make them feel challenged, but excited to question their own beliefs. And
yeah,
it's, I have screwed that up for sure a few times and pushed too hard or not pushed hard enough. But it's how do the visual that when I find myself in that situation, and it's every time I'm with a more mature executive team, there's somebody, at least one person, if not multiple people. The visual that I have is we're sitting around a table trying to solve something, and the person is next to me, not across from me. And we're like
yeah,
looking at a piece of paper together. So that's the visual that I put in. And so that what the psychology is, I try to use language by assessing them in real time. Like, how do I not make them feel like I'm attacking them for all the hard work that they've done? Because it's not what I'm actually doing. I'm
yeah,
just going to say, like, help me understand what you believe so deeply. And so what happens from that, a couple things happen from that, but the thing that happens most common, which I appreciate, is they don't know how to articulate it, but they actually do know. They just don't know how to articulate it. So I help them figure out how to articulate it. And in that, always they will realize there are holes in their own thinking that they just stumbled on their own because they can't articulate something. They're like, oh, I don't know. Like, well, cool. Let's go through it. And I don't have to go back and name, oh, this is this part of W3. It doesn't matter. That's ego if I did that. It's like, okay, great. We have a question that we don't know the answer to. Like, let's solve it together. I don't know either. You don't know. Like, let's go figure it out. So that's how
yes,
I approach
yeah,
it. So that's like an example. But there's a lot of customization when it comes to more mature teams, but it's more around the psychology of how people accept it than the actual work itself. Because I think for the most part, the work is it translates really well, which is
yeah,
largely luck.
yeah. I love that idea of working with them and, hey, I'm trying to improve things for you and I'm sitting next to you. I don't know if you have any
Yeah, and
other.
actually, I'm very careful to never say I'm trying to improve for you because it assumes that I know
Yes,
something they don't know, and I almost never do. It's their business.
yeah,
I don't know more than them. What I know is how to use this framework and how to get the most out of the framework. So I say,
yeah,
you've got all the knowledge. Let's put your knowledge into this database or this framework, and then together we will see what we can spit out of it. But they're the experts. I never profess to be the expert.
yes. It sounds like that in that particular example, you're working a lot with, as you mentioned, like leadership teams and things like that.
Yeah, C level, VP level execs. Yeah.
When it comes to like rolling things out in the organization and getting change there, yeah, how have you found any tips on how to get cultural change? Like that's oftentimes the hardest bit. I mean, Levers is great. There are different process methodologies and ways to improve organizations, and sometimes it's hard with legacy behavior, people being stuck in the way that they do things. Well, we've always done these things. Why do we need to change? Sometimes it's helping to build the case, but I'd love your ideas on, yeah, how you get more buy-in.
Yeah, I'll start with it's really, really hard. And
Yes.
you know that, but I want for the listeners, like that the change management like this is never easy. Even if it's like a 1 degree change, it's still change. I do have a lot of like personal experience helping organizations as a senior leader, helping organizations manage through change. Um, the book does not touch on change management at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe we touch on it a little bit um, indirectly, but not directly. The book is pretty regimented in what it's meant and not meant to do. That being said, what I have found is um, bringing um, it has to start from the top. So first of all everyone needs to be bought in, which is why it's so important for the executive team to be working together. And what I encourage them to do is once there's some principled agreement across the executive team. So for example, as an executive team, we agreed that our W3 is this, and there's a definition that the executive team agrees upon. It's immediate that the head of sales and the head of marketing, or anyone else who's touching that messaging is starting to permeate through the entire organization. And as whatever work that they're doing, people are they're getting carrot not stick. So for example, if there's a slight shift to the definition of who a customer is through the W3 exercise, that conversation needs to happen right away. And so like, okay, you sold a new customer. Hey, great job. Let's understand how this customer does or does not fit into our current W3. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have sold them. It doesn't mean they're a bad customer, but let's just start thinking about it as an organization, so that we're starting to, as a full organization, use the same language, the same definitions, the same things. So that's one. The
Yeah.
other thing, and I think like this is where revenue formula and the KPI exercise become really, really critical. I'll start with revenue formula. What revenue formula is meant to do a few things, but one of the things that it is really fundamentally meant to do is say, so it starts with here's how the math equation we think our business is. That's the top line of your revenue formula. The next couple of steps in it is defining what are the drivers and sub drivers of each value of the math equation. Those are to-dos. This is a big to-do list. And
Yep.
so as you start to define the to-do list, it's imperative that the senior owner of that to-do, and sometimes there's multiple, starts to bring in the parties that were actually going to be involved in the execution for buy-in, for belief, for how to. It's all sort of tied together. And then when it comes to the planning, my belief is to empower the team to create the plan or co-create the plan with the senior leader, so they're not being, hey, go do this thing, but hey, what do you believe we should do? I'm your senior leader. I'm going to guide it. I'm going to give you the strategy, but I want your buy-in by helping us build out what we're actually going to do. So if you do this really well, and it is really hard and could take
Yeah.
years before you get into this cycle, right? But if you do this really well, what happens is every single person in the organization knows exactly what they're doing. They were part of creating it. They know why they're doing it. They know how it impacts the business, and they know what they should not be doing, because they can say, this doesn't translate to any of the things that I'm responsible for. So if this needs to happen, we either need to redefine something, which means I have to have a conversation with people, or I need to find out who the owner should be, which isn't me, which is totally okay.
Oh, hey, I know you're tuned in right now, so I'll keep this super quick, but you like awesome YouTube videos, don't you? Well, there's not really that many YouTube channels that create great content about how to systemize your small business, so I want to make sure that you catch every video that I publish. So if you haven't already, firstly, give this video the thumbs up, and then go ahead and subscribe to my channel. You can even hit the bell notification to make sure that you're the first to know when I publish anything. So go ahead, do it right now. I'll wait a sec, and then I'll transfer you back to the video.
Yes. Yeah. I
But it
think
is hard. It's hard as it was to describe. It is 100 times harder to do.
yes. I think I've realized someone who's listening to this who might not yet know the levers, like a high level, I know what I love most about it is the simplicity in getting very clear on, well, what is your customer? Who are they buying? How are you creating value for them and ultimately getting revenue?
Yeah.
Thinking about what it is that you should be working on now and next, and what it is that you're doing and building out this plan. But I'm wondering if how you would describe it, let's say high level for someone who hasn't yet gone through levers, and then maybe we can even just briefly touch on the levers themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. So I like to think, or we like to think, that the title of the book describes what the import or the intent is. So the book title, for anyone listening who isn't familiar, it's Levers: The Framework for Building Repeatability into Your Business. So what we are hoping to do is provide you with a series of frameworks, which is one overarching framework at the end of the day, that when you do this really well, you will understand how to make your business repeatable. You will know what levers to pull, what they do at the most granular level, so that we take as much guesswork out of your business as possible. And not we, you take as much guesswork out of your business as possible. And we do that by providing 5 frameworks. There's actually a 6th, which we have it as an appendix in the book. But when we do a second edition, we're actually going to make it chapter 1, because one of the things we learned is that we made an assumption that most businesses have this, and it's not true, and it's important, but it's the only one that's not data driven. So would you like me to walk through all 5 very
Yeah,
quickly?
let's do it.
So the one that is currently an appendix, but we're moving to chapter 1, is the only one that's not metrics driven, but it's basically defining your cultural mission statement. And so going back to the importance of change management, it starts with this. Are we all saying the same thing? Do we all have the same belief of what the business is and how it's going to change the world that it's trying to change? So not the globe, but like, you're trying to
Yeah.
change marketers and SMBs. How are you going to change that world? So having a unified way to communicate that. It doesn't have to be used for marketing purposes. It can be, but it's meant to be an internal way for everyone to talk about the business. What do we care about? What's our vision and mission? So that's one. Once you have that, everything should align under that. So the
Yeah.
next one, which we call your W3 framework, which is a framework to help you get to your ICP, or your ideal customer profile. So it doesn't tell you what it is. It is a framework to help you understand what it is. So it doesn't replace it. It complements it. And at its core, it's asking you to answer 3 questions about who you believe your customer is, and then collect data to back that up. The 3 questions is: who is your customer? Defined very specifically and narrowly. And what we usually tell people is, you've done a good job when you that definition. If you meet someone that meets that definition, you will close them 100% of the time. That doesn't mean you close 100% of sales, because something might not be right in that profile. But if that profile is right, you will close them 100% of the time. And you can identify that person, and timing will be part of that. So that's the who. The second W is what. What are they buying from you? Not what are you selling to them? And this is really important. And this is a way that you communicate to them. So, rather than say, well, we sell widgets. Well, they don't care that you sell widgets. What they care is they're buying what? They're buying revenue, they're buying time, they're buying ease of use, they're buying systemization. What are they buying from you? But really important to understand what they're buying, not what you're selling. They don't care what you're selling. And then the third is why. Like, why is it important to the business? Why is it important to them as the buyer? And those are not always the same thing, but understanding those 2 things. So those are the first 2 frameworks: mission,
Yes.
vision, and W3. The third framework is called finding your revenue formula. At its core, revenue formula can be sort of synonymous with business model. But you think about revenue formula, if you close your eyes and picture something, you're looking at a math equation like A times B times C equals revenue. Or, you're a SaaS business, it's, number of companies times number of seats per company times dollar per seat equals revenue. Really
Yeah.
simple. When you're an early stage business, you may not actually know what it is. That's okay. But when you're a later stage business and you're operating and you have revenue, like, there is an equation. You just have to define it. The important work comes after you define it. So let's just say it's number of companies. Well, there's a whole list of things that you have to do, understand, build, in order to prove that your revenue formula is correct. So for number of companies, you have to know who your ICP is. You have to know who your customer is. You have to know how to find them. You have to know how to market to them. You have to know what kind of sales team. You have to figure out pricing. You have to figure out what sort of internal sales tools, external sales tools. There's all this whole list of things that you have to do in order for that number of companies number for you to be able to control it moving up. So imagine
Yeah.
figuring all of that out for the entire revenue form. So that's the third framework. The fourth framework is a KPI framework. And I would just say, like, there's lots and lots of KPI frameworks out there. This one is just specific to levers, so it does translate well. It can work outside of levers too, but it's identifying what are you trying to prove that you're doing and why, and what does it unlock for you, and how do you measure it? So an example might be, if you're an earlier stage company, we want to prove that we can improve churn. Cool. And we're going to do that by building X product feature, and we're going to measure that. Of course, you're going to measure churn, but churn is going to be a lagging indicator of whether or not you've been successful. So what are the leading indicators? These are the KPIs. What are the KPIs? What are the leading indicators that you will be able to move and control the movement of churn over time? And then you got to have to figure out what that is. Is it more usage? Is it less usage? Is it specific type of usage? Is it, that's, it's going to be dependent on the company. Make sense?
Yes, 100%.
And then actually, and I jumped over a step, so my apologies. Before you get to KPIs, there's another step. So I apologize to everybody. So there, after you do revenue formula, we have an exercise called validating assumptions, which is taking everything from revenue formula and everything from W3 and more, and saying, what do you need to do now and next? And so it's this framework and this exercise that basically breaks everything into a quadrant. And the quadrant is high priority, high priority validated, high priority unvalidated, low priority unvalidated, low priority validated. And so what the book is, if it's low priority already, don't talk about it. It doesn't mean it may not become high priority, but if it's low priority today, we're not talking about it. Then we're talking about high priority. High priority validated means, great, it works, go do it, go build it. You've proven that you should move to the next step. High priority unvalidated, so let's say we're talking about a product feature, is we shouldn't build anything yet because we don't actually know. We only have beliefs that this is going to do what we think it's going to do. What is the most data that we can get that gives us the confidence to say we should spend time, money, and resources to build it? And then once you go collect that data, then it moves over to validated, and then you build it. And then that cycle happens. So that's a step between KPIs. Once you have that, then you know what you're working on, and those are the high priority and unvalidated and the high priority validated are the things that you're measuring right now. They're the most important things to measure, other than revenue, which is actually a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator of business health. And then the final part, and then I'll take a breath and let you jump in, is all of this work. What this really, really allows you to do is to build a financial model that is an operating plan for your business. Really important thing for founders to hear here right now, so they don't shut their brain off. A financial model in this context is not how did my business do? It is not a financial statement. It is not what is the current health of my business. That's not what it is. It is literally a plan in financial model format that tells you, what am I going to do next year, and what do I think the outcome of my actions will be? And if you build that well, you will have confidence in what every single person in the organization should be doing. Literally every person should be doing, what their efforts are meant to accomplish, and whether or not you're successful. And whether or not you're successful means, how do I adapt as I go along so that I can be more and more successful over time? So when you do all that work really well, you've done all the work you need to build that model and then operate your business out of that model.
I actually think that last step is one of the hardest for a lot of business owners, because everybody's great at going, oh, here's my goal for next year, and here's my revenue target, and I know what I want to have done, but it's that translation into and the plan of what you're going to do, what hires you're going to need, what product lines you're going to be selling. So that one in particular, I know a lot of business owners struggle with. What I love most about the system that you outline, it's well, firstly, the aligning of the why. I think bringing that up front is smart, because the longer you're in business, the more I think you start to appreciate the why and the values and the mission. And early on, you don't realize that as much, but then you realize that is the game. Then after that, getting very clear on who the target audience is. When I think about building systems, I mean, there's thousands of different variations and things that could happen if the client goes for this, selects this color, or goes for that widget, then do this and that. And there's so many different variations. You really just want to get the most probable or the best outcome for that ideal client and optimize towards that first. And all of the exceptions and variables, they get handled by smart team members and things like that. But let's make sure for the one person that we identify that we want to deliver value to, that we do a really great job of that. Um, and then I think getting clear on, well, and what are we doing currently, then helps you to figure out how to realign and go, well, we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be, or we should be adding this in. And all of this obviously built in to the plan. So it's like quite logical in the way that it works. In the book title, and I'm curious to know how you move to this, you talk about building repeatability. So when I think about repeatability, I'm thinking about how do we then get the team members to execute on this consistently? Because at the moment, you're kind of building the machine and building the framework, and you're getting the KPIs in place to then make sure that we're on track for executing the plan that we've just laid out. But what are some extra pieces you think about when it comes to repeatability? Like how do you actually make that repeatable?
Yeah, so I'll answer that two ways. One is I think when we think about the use of the word repeatability there, we think about it just slightly differently. But I think what you said is equally, if maybe not more important. So I want to address them both. The
Yes,
way we think about it is mechanically. How do we know through data that if we do the same thing over and over, we can predict the results, and the
yes,
results are positive? That's like our definition of it. What you're saying is, I think what you're saying is, which was kind of related to your change management, your culture question, which is, okay, so we know what to do, but how do we get people to actually do it? Am I hearing you
yeah,
correctly?
and to go from plan of, okay, here's what we're going to do. There's obviously a whole range of different tasks and things that need to go on in the organization, and they need to happen consistently, whether the business owner or key team member or leadership team members are there. Like, it just needs to happen. And I'm just wondering how you think about that
Yeah,
piece, building in the repeatability.
yeah. Uh, so I think I'm going to answer your question the way that you're asking it, to redirect me if I'm not for sure. And I want to say clearly that now we're getting into like my personal opinion and my style versus like
Yes,
my three co-authors might approach it very differently, this part of it very differently than me. And I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think this is where people have to collect data if they don't know how to do it, and then decide what's best for them. For me, it becomes a combination here of two things: becoming really clear of the profile of person that fits the business to do this kind of work. And there's lots of dimensions to that, including like I have a no assholes policy.
yes,
So,
yeah,
but not everybody does, and that's okay,
yeah,
Um, but like that's one dimension, but also like there are people like I would say people that have like a service or mercenary mindset, people that when you dig into who they are as a human, they want to be a part of something meaningful.
yeah,
They want to be helpful. Like I look for those characteristics in the people that I hire. That is not every company needs that, right? And there's downsides to that too, which is like you've got a company where like everyone is so like crazy loyal that it becomes cultish, right? I like that, but like not everyone likes that,
yes,
So that's one. And then two, I personally, and this might be my age, it might be old school, it might be because I'm a Gen X East Coaster, I don't know. I believe in incentive plans deeply for like across the organization, not just for sales. So I feel like everyone should be rewarded, like if they're if they know what they should be doing and they're doing
yes.
a good job of what they're doing, or they're doing a great job of what they're doing, there should be a way to recognize them and not just assume that they're going to do a good job.
Yes, yeah, yeah, I love that. I think that key piece around getting the right people, and that for a lot of businesses, and that's why it goes back to that thing I was asking earlier about trying to add in levers after the fact. versus, hey, I've got a brand new startup and I'm recruiting the right people for this. Because it's easier in some regards to get the right people and think about it up front rather than I have this person in the organization who's been with me for 10 years. We're now trying to add in levers and I realize they're not the right person, which then also can be quite challenging.
Happens all the time. Yeah, I mean, literally, I have that conversation weekly with founder that I've worked with. It's a challenge, and then then decisions have to be made about what do you do with that person, right? And
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
many answers. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned the idea of a rewrite and maybe version two. Oftentimes, you'll pick up a lot of learnings once you put a framework out there and you work with a lot of clients and get a lot of feedback. One of the big changes being to move the why. Were there any other significant changes or critical ones where you're like, oh, that works better here, or this needs this?
Yeah, I'll talk in more generalities, but I would say there's a couple of other things. One is the stories that we use, the examples. We have so much more data now that I
Mm,
think I think the stories in there are good, but those companies, like some of those companies had great exits, some of those companies don't exist anymore. And so with an update to the stories, which I think people relate, or that will relate,
mm,
here's how it actually works in real life. So an update to them. And then I think for I think for probably every chapter or every framework, going back to one of your first questions, we look at like complex things and all of us are similar. Like, how do we just make it very simple? I think we can simplify it even more. So that
yes.
because we think about levers as a book you do, not a book you read, right?
Yeah.
So if it's a book you do, like how do you make it the easiest 1, 2, 3 step process for somebody? So I think there's things that we can do to help to make that a little bit easier as well.
Yeah, I love that. There's been obviously a lot of changes going on since you wrote the book, particularly around the AI space. Um, I'd be curious to know how you and your co-authors are thinking about AI, where it fits into the picture with levers, if you're using it to help you get outcomes, faster, cheaper, better, or if it's something that you not see. Yeah, I'm just curious on that.
Yeah, I have so many different thoughts here. One is, and we've even batted this around as a business idea, although, being candid, I don't think any of us are going to do it collectively or
Mm,
independently, which is how do I think there's a way to use AI to help facilitate the process of figuring it all out much faster.
yeah,
Um, and I don't know, maybe we will do it, who knows. But so that's a thing that we have batted around. I think in terms of collecting information, I haven't really contemplated offering specific advice of how to use AI on a chapter per chapter basis, but I bet, assuming we do write a second edition, I bet you that comes up because it's pretty natural that it would. That being said, I think the most savvy organizations are probably that use it are already figuring out, using AI to figure out things like their W-3 faster or
yeah,
their revenue formula, the drivers and subdrivers specifically faster.
yeah. I definitely think I love the idea of if you did head down the path of some sort of guided AI that asks particular questions at each of the different stages, and the client can provide info. Like, imagine saying, interview three of your best clients, transcribe it, and post the interviews into this prompt here, and we'll draft out that ideal client for you. Or, here's a bit about my product line, and okay, and some pricing. Can you help me figure out the revenue model? I definitely think there's something in that because
Yeah.
what you've got is a process which mean and there'll be inputs that the clients have. So I think kind of putting the two together, because really prompting and the system is just the programming for the machines. So the next step is to take what you've already got and stick it into the robot and say, all
Yeah,
right,
it's
take these inputs.
precisely how we're thinking of this. Maybe as a question for you, because like this might be a naive assumption, but my assumption is that one, what you just described, what we're thinking about, it's not a really a hard thing to build. And like I'm not technical, and I think I could
Yeah.
probably figure out in a short amount of time how to like get that out there. But because of that, is there really a value? And I'll tell you why I'm asking the question this way, but is there really a value in doing that for founders versus them figuring out how to do that themselves? And this is a little, again, a little bit of that Gen X in me, which is teach a person to fish, don't give them a fish. And so suggest go do this versus doing it for them. I don't know. Like these are the thoughts that
Yes.
float in my head. I'm like, is if we go through the effort of doing this and putting it out there in the world, like, are we actually doing something that's additive that people can easily go to themselves? Maybe it's not as easy as I'm thinking because they're so busy with what they're doing and that they really just do need an easier tool. So that's one of the
Yeah.
causes. Yeah.
Well, definitely having the output, like if you give me the ideal client profile mapped out based on a bunch of information that I provide or that you know about my business, and then it goes through your framework and massages it and then delivers it out in the specific output that you think is perfect to move through the levers framework, I feel like there's definitely some value for there. And some of the things where the client in particular, like I mentioned, step number 5, like building out that plan, for a lot of business owners is one of the hardest bits. And if you can chew up all of the data from the previous 4 steps and even just get a starting point where you start to pre-populate, and then it's just like, hey, here is your drafted AI answer based on your data. Now you hop in and you customize it and make it just right and suit your business. I just think for the first time, like the first time people go through uh, systems like this and levers, there's a bit for them to process. It's easy for you now, having seen it so many times, and it's just second nature. But the first go is always the hardest. Anything that you can do to get the first go done makes my iterations that much easier. So,
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm actually talking to Trevor on Tuesday about all of this stuff. So
yes,
yeah, this is good. Perfect timing for this conversation. So
yes, yeah.
that's really helpful and I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll right back at you. I appreciate you putting together the frameworks, and the book's great. I'm going to put a link through to the Levers book on Amazon. If people want to find out more about your work, is the book the best place to start, or where should we send them?
You can send them to my LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Yeah,
perfect.
that's probably the best place. And I do read every LinkedIn message I get and respond to every message that is appropriate to respond to.
Yeah, perfect. All right, well, I'll pop a link into that as well. And thank you so much, Amos, for your time.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me. Really great talking to you.